Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something that is, I think, easily the most analytically challenging and frankly controversial source we've ever attempted.
I'd agree with that.
We have some highly concentrated excerpts from a document titled Western Erasure, a 70-year policy analysis of functional genocide.
That title is deliberately provocative. It tells you right away the kind of scope we're dealing with here.
Exactly.
You're not looking at standard political debates or, economic cycles.
Yeah.
This is a policy analysis that spans 7 decades.
70 years.
Right.
From 1955 all the way to 2025.
And it claims to document the systematic destruction and replacement of a very specific demographic group.
Right. What the authors identify as indigenous majority white Western populations.
And crucially, not through kinetic warfare, but through policy.
That's the key distinction, isn't it? The whole thesis is built on this idea of functional destruction. The systematic imposition of conditions, economic, institutional, cultural, that are, as they put it, calculated to prevent the continuity of this specific group.
So our mission today has to be crystal clear.
It does.
We need to unpack the core arguments. We need to look at the, frankly, huge amount of data they use.
It's very data-heavy, demographics, economic.
All of it. And through that, we need to understand exactly how the authors define and try to support this really profound claim of functional genocide.
And I think our focus has to be on synthesis.
Yes, because the analysis doesn't present these as, isolated policy mistakes.
No, it's all connected.
It argues that policies across demographics, economic extraction, institutional capture, they've all converged. They've reinforced each other.
Creating a single predictable outcome.
A destructive one. So we're serving as guides to this material for you, the learner, so you can see the arguments being made, understand the mechanics of the claims, and evaluate the often shocking evidence they deploy.
Okay, let's get right into it then. Part 1, the foundation of their whole thesis, the demographics.
This is where they start. Cold, hard numbers.
And they don't ease into it. The source just hits you with this massive, almost unbelievable claim. A global deficit of 1.2 billion missing white Western people.
It's the headline figure, and it's designed to shock. To understand it, you have to understand how they calculate it.
It all starts with a baseline.
The very specific one. They go back to the mid-1950s, which they frame as this high point of post-war stability and demographic health for the West.
And they define that 1955 baseline very carefully. In the U.S., for example, the white population was about 145 million people.
Which is 88% of the total population at the time.
And the really critical number here is the total fertility rate, or TFR.
The average number of children a woman will have in her lifetime.
Which was 3.5.
Well above the replacement level of 2.1. Globally, they put the number at about 750 million Western people, making up around 25% of the world's population then.
So that was the era of the, high cohesion, demographically stable community.
Right. And from that baseline, the deficit calculation begins. They apply a what they call a moderate, even conservative, projected growth rate.
1.5% annually.
Over 70 years, applied to that 750 million baseline, if that rate had been maintained.
Which, for a healthy population isn't a wild assumption.
Not at all. The analysis calculates that the global white Western population should be standing at approximately 2.1 billion people today.
Which would be somewhere around 18 to 20% of the current world population.
That's their projected population figure.
But the reality they document for 2025, it's a completely different picture.
Radically different. Their estimates show the current global number is only between 850 and 900 million.
And as a percentage of world population.
Down to just 11%.
So the gap between the 2.1 billion projected and the, say, 850 million actual.
That's the 1.2 billion person deficit. That deficit is the demographic destruction they're claiming.
And they bring it down to the national level, too. The U.S. white population is now around 195 to 200 million.
A drop from 88% of the country down to about 60%.
That's a massive shift.
And the source claims the deficit for the U.S. alone is over 500 million people. 550 million missing white Americans. This huge measurable reduction is their Exhibit A.
So what's the mechanism? How did this happen? The analysis points to a massive, sustained fertility collapse.
The TFR data is, well, it's undeniable. You can't argue with it.
The U.S. TFR for this group went from 3.5 in 1955.
All the way down to 1.6 by 2025.
That's a 54% reduction, a drop of more than half in the ability or willingness to reproduce.
And you see similar numbers across Western Europe. They drop from the high 2s down to 1.4, 1.5, sub-replacement.
And the source adds this really important historical context here.
Which is that no healthy, prosperous, politically independent society in recorded history has ever voluntarily sustained sub-replacement fertility for 50-plus years.
50 consecutive years. I mean, that's not a blip. That's not a recession.
It's a systemic collapse.
It's a long-term demographic death spiral. And the analysis says this wasn't just a cultural choice.
No, they argue it's a systemic pathology, and it was enforced by policy.
Precisely. And while this internal collapse was happening, the source argues a second mechanism was introduced for replacement.
They point directly at the 1965 Immigration Act, the Hart-Celler Act. They call it the key policy shift that kicked off what they term demographic substitution.
Right. This act got rid of the old national origin quotas, which had favored European immigration.
And it shifted the whole system to focus on family reunification and certain employment skills.
But this is where the source makes a very serious claim about high-level deception.
They quote Senator Ted Kennedy's floor speech from 1965,
where he's on the record assuring the public that the bill would not lead to some huge influx of immigrants.
and would not upset the ethnic mix of our society. That's the direct quote.
But the source then claims that internal memos, which they say were later declassified, show that officials knew perfectly well what the demographic impact would be.
So they were publicly denying it while privately understanding it. The source uses this to argue foreknowledge, to argue intent.
So you have this dual-pronged mechanism they're outlining. First, you have policy and cultural pressure to suppress internal births.
Driving TFR down by 54%.
And second, you open the door to a massive exponential stream of immigration, overwhelmingly non-European, to replace that declining population.
The numbers are stark. The U.S. went from maybe 250,000 immigrants a year in the 50s, mostly from Europe.
To over 1 million a year now, with less than 10% from Europe.
And this brings us right to the most controversial term in the whole document, functional genocide.
They are very, very careful about how they define this.
Meticulous. They make a clear distinction between their term and legal genocide, which requires proving explicit, conscious intent to destroy a group.
A very high bar to clear.
An almost impossible one without, smoking gun memo.
But they argue that the functional definition is met.
Yes. Because the outcome, that 1.2 billion person deficit, is the result of systematic policies. And the consequences of those policies were foreseeable. They were sustained for decades. And it doesn't matter what the stated benign intent was. The outcome, they argue, is destruction.
And they actually apply this framework to specific criteria from the UN Genocide Convention, Article 2.
This is a crucial step in their argument.
Yeah.
They claim 3 specific criteria are met.
Okay, let's break those down.
First, Article 2, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group.
Now, this is where they make a huge interpretive leap.
A huge one. They argue that economic policies that make having a family financially impossible,
And cultural messaging that discourages having kids.
that combination functions exactly like a policy intended to prevent births. They see the 54% PFR drop as the proof. The policy worked. The births were prevented.
Okay, let's pause right there. Defining wage suppression as preventing births. That's a massive stretch from any standard legal interpretation. Does the source offer any kind of legal precedent for that, or is this entirely their own framework?
They acknowledge it's a functional claim, not a strictly legal one. They say there's no precedent because the mechanism is new. It's not kinetic, it's economic, it's cultural.
But the effect is the same.
That's their argument. If you systematically make it impossible for 90% of a population to afford children, and that population stops having children, they say you have to infer the intention from the obvious destructive outcome.
Understood. What are the other 2 criteria?
Second, they cite Article 2, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction.
And their evidence for that is what? The wage theft.
The wage suppression, the destruction of stable communities, which they argue leads directly to the demographic replacement we just talked about, from 88% down to 60%. And as we'll get into, the deaths of despair.
And the third one.
Article 2, causing serious mental harm to members of the group.
Okay, and that's the cultural piece.
Exactly. The educational system teaching shame about their own heritage, the media portraying the group as uniquely oppressive, the chronic economic stress. It all adds up to a massive mental health crisis and societal hopelessness.
So, to sum up their foundational claim, when policies consistently produce group destruction across demographics, economics, and culture over 7 decades,
The distinction between explicit intent and functional policy-driven destruction becomes meaningless for the group being destroyed.
And the 1.2 billion person deficit is the ultimate undeniable proof.
Which sets the stage perfectly for part 2, because the next question is obvious.
How exactly did they make having children so economically impossible?
And that leads us straight into the core of their economic argument. They call it the fundamental theft.
The productivity wage decoupling.
This data point is, I think, the most shocking, quantifiable part of the entire document. And they claim it is systematically ignored by every major institution.
And it's all based on Bureau of Labor Statistics data.
From 1979 to 2024, nearly half a century of data.
So let's get into the numbers. According to the source, over that period, worker productivity went up by a massive 80.9%.
A huge increase in the value produced per hour of work, but the average real hourly wage.
It only went up 29.4%.
That gap, that 51.5 percentage point gap, is what the authors label the theft.
Let's make that tangible for you, the learner. If wages had actually kept pace with that 80.9% productivity growth.
The source calculates the median hourly wage today should be $39.80 an hour.
And the actual median wage is just $19.33.
The difference is $20.47 every single hour.
And when they use that term theft, they don't mean taxes.
No, this is pre-tax. They define it as the value created by the worker that was diverted away from them and captured by capital owners, executives, financiers.
So that $20.47 hourly loss, what does that look like annually?
You multiply it by a full-time work year, 2,080 hours, and it comes out to an annual wage theft of $42,578 per worker.
Per full-time worker. That's a monthly loss of $3,548.
$3,500 a month.
I mean, think about what that means for a family. That's a mortgage. That's childcare. That's the ability to save, to invest.
It fundamentally changes the entire American lifestyle. And they scale it up nationally.
What's the aggregate number?
A colossal $7.02 trillion.
Yeah.
Every year.
$7 trillion.
And they stress this isn't money that just vanished. It was produced by American labor and then, through policy, redirected to a tiny slice of the population. A wealth transfer on a scale that's hard to even comprehend.
And as damning as that $42,000 annual figure is, the source argues the true theft is actually much higher.
It is, because they claim the government has been systematically manipulating how we even measure the cost of living.
The inflation numbers.
This is a really critical piece of their argument. They contrast the official number, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI,
which says prices went up about 188% between 1979 and 2024.
with the real-world inflation for the things families actually have to buy to survive, the essentials.
And the difference is just, it's insane.
It is. Official inflation, 188%. But the source cites real costs. Housing went up 482%.
Healthcare, 411%.
And higher education is just off the charts, anywhere from 421% to over 1,700%.
So the real inflation for the essential basket of goods is closer to 400%, not 188.
And this statistical manipulation, they argue, has a very precise purpose.
Okay.
First, understating true inflation suppresses cost of living adjustments, CLAs. For pensions, for Social Security, it devalues savings.
And second,
It hides the true decline in purchasing power. It allows politicians and economists to stand up and say the economy is strong while the median family is drowning.
so when the source recalculates everything, accounting for both the productivity gap and this 400% real inflation.
The numbers get even more extreme. They argue the true hourly wage should be around $45 an hour.
And compared to the actual $19.33.
So the true hourly theft is almost $26 an hour.
And that gets you to their higher figure for the monthly loss,
That's how they arrive at the true monthly wage gap of $4,500 to $6,000 per worker.
which is an annual theft of $54,000 to $72,000.
From every single full-time worker. And for the now required two-income household,
You're talking over $100,000 a year.
$108,000 to $144,000. This, they claim, is the quantifiable economic destruction that underpins their entire functional genocide argument.
An immense amount of wealth. So how did the system pull this off? They detail specific policy mechanisms.
It starts with destroying labor's power to negotiate,
The unions.
the deliberate, systematic undermining of unions. Membership fell from 35% in the mid-50s to barely 10% today.
And they point to a specific moment, the 1981 Patancio strike.
Yes, when President Reagan fired the striking air traffic controllers, the source argues this sent a signal to every corporation in America.
That the government would side with capital against labor.
Every single time. It destroyed their bargaining power and functionally capped wages across the whole economy, ensuring all those productivity gains flowed up, not out.
So after crushing internal labor power, the next mechanism was trade policy.
NAFTA in '94, China joining the WTO in 2001, it led to a mass exodus of good jobs.
And these weren't just any jobs.
No, this was a targeted destruction of community wealth. These were the stable, high-paying manufacturing jobs that supported the entire single-income family model of the 1950s.
The ones that didn't require a college degree.
Exactly. They cite the China shock studies, which directly link 2 to 2.4 million manufacturing job losses to Chinese import competition. The devastation in the Rust Belt in Appalachia.
Was the foreseeable price of cheap TVs and bigger corporate profits.
That's the argument. And the third mechanism ties right back to part one. It's using immigration as a tool for wage suppression.
The source is very direct about this.
Very. They claim one of the privately understood functions of the 1965 Immigration Act was to massively expand the labor supply, specifically to keep wages from rising.
And they cite academic research on this.
They do. Research suggesting immigration reduced wages for native-born workers without college degrees by between 3 and 8%. They point to things like the H-1B visa program as a modern tool for replacing American tech workers with cheaper foreign labor.
So you have these three interlocking policies.
Destroy unions, offshore the best jobs, and flood the low-skilled labor market. All three systematically reduce the price of labor wages and prevent workers from demanding their share.
And this connects that massive $54,000 annual theft directly back to the demographic collapse.
This is the linchpin. This wage theft is the primary mechanism of birth prevention. This is how they argue UN Article 2 is fulfilled. Policy created the economic impossibility of raising a family.
The numbers they use here are just brutal.
They are designed to show the structural impossibility. They estimate the cost to raise 2.1 children. The replacement rate is somewhere between $860,000 and $1.28 million.
Over 18 years.
Which means a family needs between roughly $48,000 and $71,000 a year just for child-related spending.
But when you look at the median household's actual discretionary income after taxes, housing, healthcare, all the basics, the source says there's only about $10,000 left.
Which leaves an annual deficit of between, say, $38,000 and $61,000.
It's just to have a replacement-level family.
So their conclusion is stark. For the median household, having a family at the replacement rate is economically impossible. It can't be done without massive family wealth or 2 high six-figure incomes. It's a complete inversion of the 1950s baseline.
And the housing crisis is a huge part of this.
Integral. They detail the affordability collapse. In 1979, a single earner could buy the median home with about 28% of their income.
Today,
2 earners often can't afford it. The median home now eats up 51% of the median household income.
and that pushes back the timeline for everything.
It directly impacts family formation. To get a 20% down payment on a median home today, which is over $83,000, a median family saving 5% of their income needs 22 years.
22 years.
So home ownership and the stability that comes with it is delayed until your late 30s or early 40s, well past your prime childbearing years. It's a functional barrier to reproduction.
And student debt just pours gasoline on that fire.
It's an accelerant. The average debt is nearly $38,000. And the data shows it delays marriage by 1 to 2 years and the first child by 2 to 3 years.
Which might not sound like a lot.
But it is. Delaying the start of a family past age 30 reduces lifetime fertility significantly. This policy choice created debt servitude, trapping a generation and preventing them from achieving stability during their peak fertility window.
And finally, they touch on the cultural side, abortion and contraception.
They cite the 63 million abortions since 1973, with about 35 to 40 million affecting the target demographic. But they're less focused on the act itself and more on the functional effect.
What do you mean?
They argue when you combine the cultural normalization of family limitation, feminism prioritizing career over family, environmentalism about population control, with the crushing economic coercion that makes kids unaffordable.
The result is the same as if the state just outlawed births.
That's their point. The system created insurmountable structural barriers, and those barriers drove the TFR from 3.5 down to 1.6. In their view, that is the literal definition of birth prevention under Article 2.
So we've laid out the economic and demographic destruction, which brings us to part 3 and the next obvious question. How did this happen without the target population fighting back?
Right. How is this vast systemic theft maintained politically?
The source argues it was only possible through institutional capture and cultural destruction, which made democracy itself, as they say, functionally meaningless.
This section starts with how political power was transferred from people to capital. They claim a series of key legal rulings basically inverted how democracy is supposed to work.
The corporate personhood inversion.
Exactly. They point to rulings like Santa Clara in 1886, which gave corporations 14th Amendment rights, and then later Buckley v. Vallejo, and of course, Citizens United.
And the functional mechanism here is what?
The legal system basically decided that money equals political speech,
Granting corporations unlimited spending power.
which the source calls a functional absurdity. A corporation can be a person with unlimited rights and limited liability, but it can't be drafted, it can't be jailed, it can't be executed. It has all the rights and none of the responsibilities.
While actual human citizens have limited political speech and full accountability.
And the spending ratio is something like 20 or 30 to 1, corporate versus individual.
Yeah.
It just prices the average person out of the conversation completely.
And that's before you even get to lobbying.
Lobbying is what they call the direct cost of protecting the theft. $3.8 billion a year is spent in Washington.
To make sure the laws are written by and for corporate interests.
They argue that $3.8 billion is just the annual operating cost to protect the $7 trillion annual wage theft. It's an investment with an absolutely astronomical return.
And the revolving door is what makes it all work.
It's the proof of capture. Regulators leave government, become high-paid lobbyists for the industries they just regulated, and vice versa.
The Goldman Sachs to Treasury Department pipeline.
That's a classic example. The industries are writing their own rules. The whole mechanism ensures policy always favors concentrated corporate wealth over the interests of labor.
So with the political system captured, that clears the way for the second part of this, the cultural assault, the demoralization.
This, they argue, is the functional fulfillment of UN Article 2, causing serious mental harm. It's a systematic attack on the target group's heritage, cohesion, and self-worth.
And they contrast the educational narratives.
They do. The 1960s narrative was one of progress, celebrating founders. The modern narrative is one of perpetual oppression.
They point to things like the 1619 Project as a prime example.
Reframing American history to induce guilt and shame. The claim that the revolution was fought to preserve slavery, that all foundational institutions are irredeemably racist.
And what's the intended functional effect of teaching that?
To reduce group cohesion, to induce self-hatred, and critically, to reduce the willingness to reproduce and defend a country you're taught is uniquely evil. Why would you continue a lineage you're told is a stain on history?
And this is weaponized through DEI policies.
Which the source explicitly calls anti-group policies.
How so?
The core premise of DEI, they explain, is achieving equity equal outcomes, which means any white overrepresentation anywhere must be defined as structural racism.
So to achieve equity,
the target group must necessarily be diminished in numbers and in power, and they detail how this is implemented. Explicit racial preferences in hiring, the whole white privilege narrative that attributes all success to unearned advantage, not merit. It creates a hostile environment.
And at the same time, any attempt by that group to defend itself is suppressed.
This is a crucial point, the functional asymmetry. Groups like Black Lives Matter or La Raza are celebrated.
Institutionally supported.
But any attempt at explicit white advocacy, even just the phrase "white lives matter," is immediately condemned as hate speech. It can get you fired, ostracized.
So the functional effect is that the group is politically disarmed.
Exactly. They are prevented from organizing to defend their collective interests against the very policies we've been detailing.
And all of this, the economic stress, the cultural attack, has real measurable health consequences.
Which brings us back full circle to the UN articles. The mental harm is obvious. The shame, the guilt from education, compounded by the chronic anxiety and hopelessness from the economic reality.
And the bodily harm, the physical destruction.
They quantify it with the deaths of despair.
Suicide, drug overdose, alcoholism.
The source points to data showing white male suicide rates jumped 40% between 1999 and 2020.
A 40% increase.
And they directly correlate the opioid epidemic's devastation in the Rust Belt with the economic destruction from those trade policies. These excess deaths, they argue, are the direct, foreseeable physical consequences of inflicting conditions calculated to bring about destruction.
So this systematic destruction across economics, demographics, culture, it's so vast. The source claims it couldn't have happened in a vacuum, which is the entire point of Part 4.
Yes, a searing indictment they call the professional class betrayal, the lie of silence.
The argument is that this is only possible because every single professional class with a duty to warn the public chose silence.
And complicity. It's a sweeping accusation.
Let's start with economists. Their whole job is to analyze this stuff.
They had the BLS data. They could see the $4,500 to $6,000 monthly theft. It was right there.
But the vast majority said nothing.
Worse than nothing, the source argues. Many actively defended the system. They called it market efficiency. They promoted the trade deals. They dismissed wage concerns as protectionism. They minimized the devastating impact of these policies on real people.
So why? Why the uniform silence on a $7 trillion annual theft?
The source argues the silence is the proof of capture. If an economist won't identify the single largest economic fact of the last 50 years, the $54,000 annual theft from every worker, then what are they good for? Their credentials, the analysis claims, just certify ideological conformity, not competence.
Next up, journalists. The fourth estate.
This source says they became the fifth column, a corporate defense mechanism.
Paid to distract the public while the biggest crime in history was happening in plain sight.
The analysis argues they completely betrayed their role. They ignored the $7 trillion theft, ignored the regulatory capture, and instead focused relentlessly on partisan theater, culture wars, celebrity scandals.
And the reason is simple.
Ownership. The media is owned by the very corporations benefiting from the theft. Comcast, Disney, Amazon. Why would they expose their own racket?
They use the example of Chris Hedges,
A Pulitzer winner, fired and blacklisted for reporting honestly on economic inequality. They see that as proof the system actively purges anyone who tells the truth.
And you have educators, K-12 universities.
Indicted for preparing students not for independence, but for exploitation.
What do they mean by that?
Students graduate knowing all about systemic racism and gender theory, but they are completely ignorant of the productivity wage gap, of corporate lobbying, of the fact that their grandparents could raise a family on one income.
They're taught to accept declining living standards.
And to feel guilty about their heritage. The universities profit from the student loan debt that traps them, and from the DEI bureaucracy that enforces the ideology.
And politicians, of course, the elected betrayers.
The source points out that for decades, both parties put on this great show of fighting over social issues.
Guns, abortion.
While maintaining total unanimous agreement on the core corporate policies. NAFTA, China trade deals, bank bailouts, deregulation, mass immigration.
The things that actually matter to the bottom line.
The incentive structure makes it systematic. They need millions for campaigns. That money comes from corporate donors. Serving citizens means losing funding and losing that lucrative post-government lobbying job. They're corporate employees, not public servants.
The indictment even extends to people on the ground. Social workers, healthcare professionals.
It does. Social workers see the poverty every day, but instead of diagnosing the root cause, the $54,000 wage theft, the source claims they blame individual dysfunction, poor choices. They treat symptoms, which perpetuates the system.
And doctors.
They see the physical results of chronic stress. But instead of addressing the economic cause, they're prescribed SSRIs for anxiety, statins for heart disease. The source points out that actually fixing the economic problem would reduce patient volume and pharmaceutical profits. A perverse incentive to ignore the true cause of public health crises.
So this system of silence, is it a conspiracy? The source says not necessarily.
No, they argue it's maintained by a systematic selection mechanism, a 5-stage filtering process that ensures only the compliant get to the top.
Educational gatekeeping, credentialing, entry, advancement, control.
Each stage filters out anyone who challenges the narrative. If you ask the wrong questions in college, you don't get into the good grad school. If you do honest research as a professor, you don't get tenure.
So the end result is that the institutions are run by the most compliant, the most willing to stay silent.
And the system perpetuates itself, which they argue proves the authority of the entire professional class is illegitimate. Their credentials certify conformity and complicity, not competence or integrity.
Which brings us to part V, the synthesis. After all this, the source comes back to the question of intent. Was it a conspiracy, a delusion, or just a system running on its own?
They synthesize 3 models. They argue it's probably all 3 at different times.
Starting with a deliberate initiation.
In the 60s and 70s, coordinated policy shifts, like the 1965 Immigration Act, financial deregulation, all driven by specific groups with a specific vision.
Followed by ideological perpetuation.
From the 80s through the 2000s, true believers, indoctrinated in the universities, sincerely implementing the ideology, blind to its destructive effects.
And now?
Now it's a fully emergent system effect. Pure profit incentives are enough. Corporations lobby for cheap labor, politicians serve donors, universities profit from debt. It doesn't need a central conspiracy anymore. The system is designed to reward destruction.
But regardless of the intent, the functional reality is the same.
The same, systematic destruction. They insist you can infer intent from the foreseeability of the outcome, the fact they kept doing it despite the visible harm, and the systematic suppression of anyone who pointed it out.
And this leads to their core thought experiment for you, the learner.
They ask, if this exact same systematic destruction, the 1.2 billion missing people, the $7 trillion annual theft, the cultural demoralization, the deaths of despair, if all of this had happened to any other identifiable demographic group on Earth,
What would we call it?
we would unquestionably, universally label it genocide.
The source's answer is an unequivocal yes.
They claim the only difference is the dominant ideology's refusal to recognize this specific group as a potential victim. It relabels destruction as diversity and protects the profitable mechanisms of extraction.
So finally, the source offers a path forward, a restoration.
They say reversal requires non-negotiable, fundamental changes.
Starting with economic justice.
A massive wealth transfer back to labor. Maybe a universal dividend of $4,500 to $5,000 a month to restore the stolen productivity value.
Then political restoration.
Ending corporate personhood and lobbying.
And cultural recovery.
Halting the anti-group indoctrination in schools. They say these aren't dreams, they are the necessary steps to stop the destruction.
So what's the ultimate takeaway for you, the learner? The source's most powerful message is about the systemic betrayal.
It is. The silence of every credentialed expert economists, journalists, politicians, academics on the single most important fact, that $54,000 to $72,000 annual theft.
Proves their systemic unreliability on everything else.
This analysis fundamentally challenges the legitimacy of all authority in the modern West. If the expert class ignores the largest wealth transfer and the most profound demographic collapse in modern history,
You are being asked to question all of it.
that's the staggering implication.
You've seen the data, you've heard the source's arguments. Now you have to face their ultimate challenge.
Sure.
If the system selects for complicity across every major domain, how do you find truth in a world where authority has, in their view, forfeited its legitimacy?
And what strategies must you adopt personally to protect yourself and your family from policies designed to extract your wealth and prevent your group's continuity?
That is the question this deep dive leaves you with.
The source provides its analysis of the problem. The resulting challenge is one of verification and trust in a system that has, in their view, proven its deep structural betrayal.
Thank you for joining us for this incredibly challenging deep dive. We encourage you to use this analysis to inform your own critical research and your own decisions.